Nearly 90% of Palestinians supported the attack on October 7th. They celebrated it. They danced on the rooftops. They threw candies. You know what message the leaders who recognized the Palestinian state this week sent to the Palestinians? It's a very clear message. Murdering Jews pays off.
There weren't many people in the UN General Assembly to hear Benjamin Netanyahu's powerful speech, because many of them had walked out when he stood up to address them.
Order in the hall. Please, order in the hall.
The other main talking point from the UNGA was the only thing so far that's been able to stop Donald Trump during his second term. Not an assassin's bullet, nor a judge, but a UN escalator. But the meeting was dominated by Gaza, with the UK, France, Australia and Canada recognising the Palestinian state, and Japan coming closer to doing so as well.
But Duncan, what about the rest of the world, where most people actually live? They aren't just spectators here. Let's get into that. The UNGA from the perspective of the rest of the world.
Okay, yeah, let's take a look. This is the world reframed.
So this awakening to the recognition that Palestinians should have their own state has been on the lips of G7 leaders for years, in which time dozens of other countries have already acted to give their own recognition. Basically, if you look at a map, which you can see on your screen, you see that recognition of a Palestinian state is really old news. Almost everywhere was already doing it well before this UN General Assembly.
Yeah. So one of the big themes of the UNGA was actually why the UN doesn't work. Donald Trump seems to think it's largely because it's too strong and it's meddling in other countries' affairs and it's got this pro-immigration worldview.
But the Global South leaders largely want more UN, but a UN which represents the world more fairly. Liberia's Joseph Boakai called for Africa to have a seat on the Security Council.
Liberia looks forward to advocating for Africa's fair representation on the UN Security Council, which can only be achieved through permanent representation as a key part of the UN Security Council reform agenda.
And he was supported, among others, by Kenya's William Ruto.
Africa deserves, ladies and gentlemen, at the very least, 2 permanent seats with full rights, including the right to veto, and 2 additional non-permanent seats on the United Nations Security Council.
As a reminder, the UN Security Council was set up just after the Second World War, basically to give the victors in that conflict the greatest say in how the world is run. So it has 5 permanent members. That's the US, France, the UK, China and Russia. And these all get a veto, which allows them to block any resolution. And then there are 10 elected members. That used to be 6, but it was extended in 1965 to allow more representation for the colonialised world. However, they don't get a veto, and they get to serve just for 2 years.
This is very obvious. It's a legacy body that represents the world as it was almost 100 years ago. But the problem is, as so often as we see, is that those holding the power are resistant to change. A couple of groups within the UN called the L69, which includes around 40 African, Caribbean, Asian and Latin American nations, and the C10, which is 10 African nations, have been campaigning for reform for decades. But to be honest, they haven't made much progress.
Yeah, the frustration is starting to mount, I think, especially because the US has been using its veto to block criticism of Israel. And that criticism has been really widespread and got a lot of support among almost all the other members of the UN.
And in general, we did hear a lot of concern from Global South leaders about the fracturing of international frameworks and weakening of international law, and even just moral solidarity across divides.
Yeah, that was epitomised by Prabowo Subianto, who's the president of the world's 4th most populous nation, Indonesia.
Extracts from his speech were some of the most watched clips on Global South World's social media accounts this week.
Yeah, and that's because of the message he gave. He was calling for unity both across borders and across faiths and across opinions as well.
Jews, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, all religions, we must live as one human family.
He even used greetings and blessings from different religions as part of his address. And he raised claims on climate change, something that came up in many of the leaders, but again, didn't really break into the headlines in the international media. He and his people are very clearly seeing the impacts. While the US charges away from cutting carbon emissions, other nations are very, very worried about what this will mean for them.
Yeah. It's an issue which is much easier to ignore, frankly, in the global north, where climate disasters are relatively rare, they're much more moderate in general. But big and small countries all around the world are seeing the impact right now. Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, Brazil's president, he promised his country will take responsibility for managing its own natural resources sustainably. Then you have at the other end of the scale, Waval Ramkalawan, who was president of the Seychelles, with its population of just over 100,000 people, and he was among island leaders who were urging the big polluters to do more for those who are actually on the front line of this issue.
So while Trump, as always, grabbed the headlines and much of the news agenda as devoted to Gaza, actually more of the session was aimed at some of the fundamental long-term issues which are daily drag on the lives of billions of people, such as debt traps, climate change, and new form of colonialism through trade, technology, and education inequalities. Thanks for being with us. Please do subscribe to Global South World's YouTube channel and tell us what you think in the comments.
Okay, you happy?
Yes, it's okay. So I think what works is